Okay, I wasn't sure if I was going to get an opportunity to put one of these up this week. Last weekend, it was either on a Saturday or a Sunday, I started getting that sore throat feeling in the back of my throat. That's not the normal allergy sinus changes with the weather being up and down and all of that. And I started to get a bad feeling about it. And then around the middle of the night, when I started getting severe chills and stuff like that, I realized that this is probably going to be my first cold of the winter, and it was. But luckily for me, most of the time when I get a cold, I'm one of those people that get persistent colds that stick around for like 10 days, and like on day 8 or 9, I'm saying, well, fuck, I'm never going to get over this. I'm going to be sick the rest of my life. I don't do well with being sick. I'm one of those people that just absolutely totally despises being sick. There was a thing on the radio I heard the other day where they were saying that a large majority of people actually enjoy getting sick once in a while because it gives them an opportunity to unplug from the world and not have to face any responsibilities, and they get to sit at home and do nothing. But I'm not one of those people. I'd rather be crushed by the daily grind of life and just daydream about being able to disconnect from everything versus wanting to actually be ill and be disconnected. That's what they make, even though most people can't afford them, and I can't either, actually. But that's what vacations are supposed to be for. Even though I'm kind of like that meme where, all these people post pictures of themselves climbing mountains and surfing on beaches during their vacations. And I'm like, well, I went to the local grocery store and I watched a lot of Netflix bullshit, and that was about it. But surprisingly enough, this one didn't last very long. After about day 6 or 7, it was pretty much kind of over with, and I'm back here again. Actually, pretty much back to normal. Let's hope that whatever virus that was, I'm immune to any cold virus for the foreseeable future. Um, Ended up watching a terrible series on that. It wasn't a terrible series. I can't really actually give you an objective breakdown as to whether it was a good show or not, but it was something called The Terror, and it involves a bunch of British guys that are down in the Arctic, shipwrecked, and most of the time they're freezing to death, or they're sick, or they're dying, while they're being pursued by this CGI polar bear with this really ugly human face on it. I mean, I was already sick and I was already having chills and I was already feeling down and out. And yeah, that was the wrong series to try to watch, even though I hadn't watched any series in a while. Although my favorite show right now of all time is The Boys. It changes. But anyway. But yeah, I couldn't give you an objective rundown on that because I was literally feeling sick and cold and like I was dying while I was watching it. It was almost like just watching my cold be put out on the big screen, or not really the big screen, the computer screen in front of me. I even had nightmares about it. I dreamed that I was on this boat freezing to death and hacking and coughing, and then I woke myself up with my own hacking and coughing. But one thing I did not do during all of that, during my time in the cult, whenever something like that would happen, or anything else would happen, or you were experiencing a real life issue, there was inevitably this asshole that would have to give you this look like he had come up with a solution to a problem that you had not thought of or could have even entertained the idea of, and he would say, "Have you thought about praying about it?" No, never thought about doing that. Never did. Not once during this whole entire thing. And that's kind of the topic of this video this week on this broadcast. Is prayer really that effective? I don't actually have the article in front of me, and I won't be able to get it up right away, but I will put a link in the description later on. Is the efficiency of prayer. I mean, in AA, they will tell you that it works, no doubt. There was one guy, he had this kind of psychotic look in his eyes. He was one of those people that would get called on every meeting to do his usual spiel, and he looked borderline crazy. He looked like one of those people, like if you sat down next to this guy on a city bus, and you turned and looked and realized who you were sitting by, you'd probably get up and change seats. It's one of those people that if you ever saw him on a New York City subway, you'd be trying to put as much distance between yourself and that person as possible. But for some reason, he was one of the little clique, and he would get called on to do a whole lot of psychotic rambling in the middle of the meeting. He was usually the guy that got called on right at the end. You always had the people that got to talk at the very end of the meeting, the really esteemed gurus that got to rebut everybody and what they were saying. But his opening thing that he would always say is he would say the power of prayer is real and the power of God is real. He would actually say it like that, only he looked a lot more psychotic in his eyes than I do. And he said it, I used to think to myself every time I would hear that, what is this, the fucking exorcist? The power of Christ compels you? Or something like that. But he would just yell that out, and everybody would kind of solemnly nod their heads like, yeah. It used to be really a disconcerting thing when I would sit in AA meetings and I'd hear these people saying this absolute nonsense. And I would look around at everybody, and they were all just vigorously nodding their heads in agreement and just totally acting like that what they were hearing was so profound. And a part of me would always be thinking the same thing. Am I the one who's crazy here? Because some batshit crazy looking dude yelling, the power of God is real at me, it doesn't really inspire me or make me feel moved or anything like that. Speaking of the power of prayer, there was an article I read while I was sick, and it was in the middle of the night, and I was just browsing one article after the other, and I ended up way out there on the internet. There was this, it's still active and current. It's called the Creflo Dollar Ministries. I did not know about this, but apparently the guy's name is Creflo Dollar. I mean, his last name, Dollar, lives up to his reputation. I remember hearing about him on the news a long time ago because he has a huge, gigantic mansion in New Jersey, and he has a huge, luxurious apartment in Manhattan, and he has a multi-million-dollar mansion in Los Angeles, and he has a Rolls Royce, and he has a private jet, and he claims the power of prayer has done him a world of good. I guess you could argue that having the last name Dollar and believing in the power of prayer has done him a lot of good. I mean, there was this problem, though, when he strangled his daughter for coming home late one night. Like literally tried to strangle her to death and beat her with a shoe. And the charges were, of course, dropped because he had a lot of money and he was a holy man. And after all, he completed some classes. I bet you anything they sent him to fucking AA meetings. Now, can you imagine what would happen if any other ordinary human being did a sick act like that? Strangling their own daughter? I mean, I'm sure the legal system would throw the book at him, which it should do in a case like that. I don't think people should strangle their own children. But, if you're a religious person with the last name of Dollar and you got multi-million dollars, and the power of prayer works for people like that, I guess. His prayers were answered. He didn't get in any trouble whatsoever, and his congregation still loved him. Kind of like Ted Haggart, the guy that hated homosexuals and drug users, and he was caught with underage boys doing drugs. And, of course, his cover story was, I was trying to help them. Yeah, that's the way you help a young underage person who has an addiction to meth. You buy him a bunch of meth, and you take him to an elderly motel somewhere, and you use an alias to check into the room with him and minister to him. He tried to get away with that, and he still has followers to this day. There's a little bit of something about this power of prayer, and these phony con artists, they seem to love it, kind of like AA. But I heard that thrown at me quite a lot. The power of God is real. Prayer is real. Prayer works. People, prayer works. And yet, the really strange thing that I want to point out before I proceed a little bit further with this is that apparently in AA, kind of like this one thing I'm about to talk about, prayer doesn't really work unless you do it the right way. Like, I remember one time when I was locked up, I wasn't locked up at this time, I was in drug court, but I was out of jail and I was mandated to those outpatient treatment type settings. And, it was these sessions where they put everybody in a circle and they would do this confrontation therapy kind of thing where they would demean you and make fun of you, and they would get all the other members to jump on the bandwagon and do it to you as well. It comes out of a really twisted cult practice called Synon that I probably need to do an entire video on. That's where all this confrontation therapy is coming from. It's not coming from some tried and true method that works effectively for people like many people are led to believe. It's like that tough love myth that everybody seems to just swallow as being factual, when in truth it's just a license for cruelty. But there was a guy in this particular group that was with me. He was court-ordered like I was at the time. I got court-ordered after I had been in AA for 5 years, by the way. But when he was asked about, they would single people out every day, and they would corner him, and they'd put him on the spot. But he said something like, do you believe in God? This is a treatment center counselor. And I thought treatment center counselors were supposed to have some area of expertise in something other than pseudo-religious horse shit. but not in this particular case. He just asked the guy, "Do you believe in God?" And he says, "Yeah. I mean, I was born and raised in the Catholic Church, kind of like I was." And he's like, "I go to Mass every Sunday, and I believe, my family and I, we pray the Rosary and all that." And the treatment center counselor looked at me and said, "Oh, you're not going to get this program. You're not going to get this program." And at the time, this guy, who was new to AA and didn't realize all of its cult practices and its mind manipulation tactics, he kind of looked taken aback. He's like, "What are you talking about? I'm not going to get this program. Why? Because I'm Catholic? What is this?" And he says, "Well, no. People who are religious don't get the program. You got to be beaten down into a state of submissiveness where you're teachable. You got to learn the real way to get a conception of God, the right relationship with God, and all this other kind of things." In other words, what AA people are saying, because I've heard this sentiment echoed in other meetings and in other groups, and I've been in meetings all over the place. People often say, "Well, you just went to the wrong meeting." Well, I went to meetings in over 5 different states, been to dozens of meetings, had dozens of home groups, had plenty of sponsors, and yet the sentiment stays the same. Like the old Led Zeppelin song, the song remains the same in every one of these cult meetings, but they would do that. Occasionally, they would kind of degrade you for having a religious preference, and of course, if you're an atheist or an agnostic, by the way, an agnostic is just a position of saying, "I don't know." It's not actually, like, you could be an agnostic atheist, meaning I don't claim to know whether a God can exist or not. I'm just not convinced that there's any evidence that has been presented to me that satisfies that, so until such time, I'm atheist. But if you're atheist, you get the same kind of bullying treatment. But what they're really saying is, they're better than all the other religions, and you're not praying the right prayers. I've actually heard that before. "Well, did you pray before you went on that drunken bender, that awful drunken bender? Have you thought about praying?" And you say, "Yeah, I prayed." And then they'll say, "What did you pray for?" And, whatever you tell them, and it doesn't really matter what you tell them, because they're going to twist it around and they're going to make it their own opportunity to do what they do best in those meetings, is degrade other people and puff themselves up and feel like they're way more superior to you than they really are. In fact, they're, usually just pieces of shit that need these meetings to inflate themselves like this. But they'll say, "Oh, well, you weren't doing it right. You weren't doing it right at all. That's not the way you're supposed to pray. The big book tells you that's not how you're supposed to pray like this. You're supposed to pray like that." In other words, the AA higher power is so inept and incompetent at what it is that if you don't say the prayer in just the right way, and you don't, maybe turn around 3 times like this before you say the prayer, and do it on your knees, and then do some jumping jacks, it doesn't hear your prayer. It doesn't care, Or if you're a drunk who's praying, but you're not going to AA meetings, and you didn't do a 4-step, well, then the AA higher power just not interested. Now, I don't know if it's deaf, or I don't know if it's just tuning into the wrong frequencies, like, I forgot what the FM stands for, something modulation. I guess you're not on the higher power frequency radio. You have to turn the knob the right way where you can broadcast to it wherever it can hear you, and it just can't hear you unless you're doing it the right way. But this is a subtle, sly way, in my opinion, of AA saying, we're better than all the other religions. We're better than all the other schools of thought about prayer and meditation and all this other kind of thing. You notice they say sort through prayer and meditation. They don't really actually ever tell you what that means. It means sitting in meetings. It means recruiting more new people to the cult. It means listening to your sponsor brag about what a badass they are, so that you can turn around and lie and brag about what a badass you are. I ought to do a video on that one. How to be an AA guru and what the qualifications are. But they're ultimately saying prayer doesn't work unless we sanction the proper prayers to work. Relationships with a higher power or God or whatever it is, that doesn't work unless we determine that it's done the way that we decide. And they talk about people like me who are very skeptical of any supernatural claims to being the height of arrogance, when to me, how arrogant could you be to say that out of all the world's religions, out of the 40,000 denominations of Christianity, and I forgot how many different denominations there are in Islam, and out of all the other religions of the earth, AA is the one that's figured out how to properly tune into the right frequency and get the higher power on the wire. You just have to do these horseshit rules in this book that is practically incoherent, and you got a special frequency vibe like a ham radio where you can broadcast straight to your higher power, spirit of the universe, that nobody else has. And this is an organization that says you got to practice humility. Rather weird how that works. But one of the funny things that I wanted to bring up, and I don't have the article in front of me where I can read it all, and I may not get the article posted with this video right away when I get it up. I may have to go back and do that later because I'm in the middle of multitasking a bunch of things at home right now while I'm doing this. Is there was, and it's not the first time it's been done, there is an organization called the Templeton Foundation, or the Templeton something or the other, John Templeton. You can look it up yourself and Google it, but, you know, like I said, I'll post one of the articles below when I get the opportunity after this is uploaded. But they were going to actually put together a comprehensive study of does prayer work? The very first time this was suggested wasn't recently. In fact, it's not an even recent phenomenon. All the way back to the 19th century, there were people that were actually asking, maybe if we put a bunch of sick patients or whatever in a controlled environment and we prayed over them and we saw what the results would be, we could conclusively build a case as to what prayer really does. But the Templeton Foundation, back in 2006, it was like $2.7 million that they studied. And again, kind of like, was it Shakespeare who said one swallow does not a summer make, or is that somewhere else? I'll have to look that up. I don't remember off the top of my head. I've heard that most of my life. One study does not a total conclusion make. Like, if you do one study and it fails, that doesn't necessarily 100% say, well, we've proven that, right? The scientific method is generally, several studies which are studied about, someone has to study the studies for biased information. Someone has to study the other studies for output. There's a whole lot of shit that goes on into formulating and actually creating a theory. But there was a study put together in 2006, and it involved patients with cardiac issues in hospital. All were in a dangerous situation. I wouldn't have wanted to have. I don't know if the patients actually knew they were a part of a broader study or not, or if it was just a situation where, you come to this patient, hey, this is going to happen for you, by the way, or not. I mean, I would hate to be on my fucking deathbed with heart trouble and a group of people come in with white lab coats on and they say, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do this. And if you die, it kind of helps our experiment understand this better. I don't know how it was. I don't know all the minute details to it, but the Templeton study found these cardiac patients with fairly bleak-looking outcomes, and they had three types of groups. They had the group of people that didn't know anything about it, who were being prayed for. They had the group of people who knew they were being prayed for, and then you had the other group of people. Now, I don't want to quote this out of context. I don't want to get it wrong, but there was one group of people who did not get prayed for at all. I don't know if they were made aware of that or if they were told, we're going to pray for you, and they didn't pray for them. I'd have to get the article again to look at all the intricate details, but I think you get the general idea of what I'm going with this. The people who were prayed for and knew they were being prayed for had significantly worse outcomes. Now, not like, really drastic, dramatic effect. It wasn't like the people who were being prayed for and knew they were being prayed for all started just dying or turning into a virus like 28 days later or some horror movie or something like that. But they had significantly worse outcomes as a result of this. Now, there's no way to 100% say we know what happened. Hey, I prayed for that guy and he had a worse outcome. Fuck, prayer kills people. It's not like we can make that kind of conclusion from one single study. There are some ideas and there was some speculation as to why this could have happened. One particular speculation was, you tell a guy who's got a heart condition and he's in bad shape and he's in the hospital, hey, we're going to get a group of people to pray for you. The guy might have had this idea of, Jesus Christ, am I in this bad a shape that I'm up here in a hospital on my deathbed and the doctors are so desperate they send a group of guys up here to say, you know what, we're treating you, but we're also praying for you because this situation looks pretty fucking bleak. Well, we don't know if that might have affected the outcome or if it might have even had the psychological effect of, well, I'm being prayed for, I should make a full recovery, and when the recovery didn't happen on the level they were expecting, mentally it could have messed with them. There's a lot of factors in play here, but overall, the broad consensus at the end of this was the people who were being prayed for and knew they were being prayed for did not have as good of an outcome as the others in this particular study group. Now, granted, again, one study does not, one swallow does not a summer make, to quote that again. If anybody can find who said that, post it in the comments for me, so I don't have to look it up. But it does kind of hint at the possibility that it may just be a placebo effect, or it could be just the possibility that it doesn't work at all. Now, of course, just like AA, it had its defenders that had a million excuses for why it didn't work. You had the people saying, well, God doesn't want to be tested. It's funny, every definition of what God wants always comes across to me as being some sulky, petulant little child, Like, what we're going to do? We're going to pray over this dying guy down here, and hey, why not just tune in on the frequency and give us a sign? Why not have the radio come on with your voice, unmistakable, and say, I heard your prayers and watch what's going to happen now. And the guy just, boof, he's 100% well. I mean, it would piss a lot of people off if that happened, because there's a lot of people out there saying, well, you weren't there when my father died or my daughter died or something like that. But at least it would do something to demonstrate the reality of this spirit of the universe that AA people talk about all the time. But now it doesn't want to do that. In fact, it's pissed off that we even dared to test it, so it just said, fuck it. All the people who are being prayed for, I'm just going to let them get worse outcomes. Just like the people in AA who just can't seem to stop drinking. Well, I know they're praying. I know they're doing everything that these creepy sponsors are telling them to, but fuck it. Let them drink themselves to death and die. I don't like the way they kiss my ass. I mean, that's basically what the excuse pages look like. Well, God doesn't want to be tested. Well, we have no idea what kind of prayers these people said for these people. Gotta have that right frequency. You gotta tune it into the right, frequency modulation or whatever, the right shortwave radio signal to get to the right God, higher power, spirit of the universe, where it'll actually do the result. And then there was also, well, God doesn't necessarily want to answer prayers if it doesn't coincide with his will. Okay, in other words, if we prayed for these sick people to get better and they didn't get better, and God didn't plan for them to get better anyway, then the prayer is not going to do no good either. I don't know if anybody ever remembers that, I don't know if anybody out there remembers that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Irish actor, I can't think of his name, brilliant actor, but he plays Satan. There's a scene where Arnold Schwarzenegger does a, you are a choir boy, compared to me, you are a choir boy, he tells him. But Satan himself even says, have you ever noticed, if you get the prayer that you want answered, God is good. If you don't get your prayer answered, he works in mysterious ways. But they had a long laundry list of excuses as to why this study could have turned out the way it did, including the people out there that said, well, based on this particular study and based on this evidence, prayer don't work. Just because AA people scream at you, the power of prayer is real, prayer works, the power of God is real, and all that other shit, doesn't seem like it has any basis in reality whatsoever. There are, really to sound it all down, I'm not talking about the Templeton experiment here, but it seems like AA's insistence that you believe in a higher power is because they don't want you to do one particular thing. They don't want you to believe in yourself. I'm not saying, and I'm not advocating on here, that you can't believe in God and believe in yourself, but I'm saying if you notice the AA way of doing things, if you really sound it all down with their program and everything, it's really all about breaking your will. It's really all about breaking who you are as an independent human being. It's really all about making you dependent on the cult religion for the rest of your life because you're too fucked up and you're too diseased and you're too riddled with character defects to make decisions of your own or even know what's best for you. So you got to put what's best for you in the hands of a bunch of creepy, disgusting, vile old-timers to decide what's best for you. They can't have you believing in yourself, so you have to believe in a higher power, including the group. You can make the group your higher power. Wait a minute. No human power could have relieved me of my alcoholism but I can make a bunch of humans my higher power, the group. As though there's some collective consciousness in having a bunch of weirdos together in these rooms who are crooks and criminals and pretty much degenerate scum. A whole bunch of degenerate scum together is a power greater than myself that I can pray to. I mean, a group of prisoners, like if you went into one of the most heavy lockdown units of a prison and you got every serial killer and rapist and murderer out there and you put them all in one room together, that's a collective consciousness type shit that AA advocates. It doesn't mean I want to turn my will and my life over to a group of people, especially a group of people like AA members. I mean, it just seems to me really strange how AA claims that you can believe whatever you want, that you can have any higher power you want, that there's no monopoly on recovery, but then they'll turn around and tell you that they got a monopoly over God and the universe and the spirit of the universe and everything else. Funny how they're... I just dropped my vape on the floor and that's what you just heard. Funny how their inherent contradictions abound. Anyway, why don't we put a subscriber comment up before I go for this week? And this subscriber says, AA shapeshifts its language as it needs to along the way. Yeah, pretty much. Variously calling alcoholism a disease, an allergy, spiritual disease, probably my favorite, a malady, an obsession, etc., etc., etc. Alcoholism is an allergy. Maybe I can get shots for my alcoholism the way I used to get allergy shots when I was a kid, huh? Hardcore steppers pore over every punctuation mark in a big book like it's the Bible, and yet they can't even properly or even coherently define what alcoholism even really is, as much ink as they spill about the subject. And that's very, very true. That's another problem with AA. You don't really even know what to pray for or expect in AA because they can redefine the terms at any given moment to change. Well, I prayed to God and I got a miracle. I don't want to drink anymore, so I don't need this anymore. Then they'll tell you that's your self-will. They'll tell you that's not really God talking to you. You see, you need them to interpret who's God and who is not in the spirit of the universe. They'll say, well, your own thoughts is not your higher power. That's your sick alcoholic thinking. But you're supposed to get a God of your understanding that you make up. I don't see how I could have ever taken any of this with any degree of seriousness whatsoever. But anyway, chime in the comments and let me know. You ever been told you were just praying all wrong? Or have you ever been told that because you believe a certain way or feel a certain way, you just won't be able to get it? Let me know your experiences with that. And as soon as I get an opportunity, I'll link the article about the Templeton Prayer Study in the bottom. See you guys next week.